Good. So welcome, everyone. We have a session with Abi Noda, who's the CEO of GetDX. And the session's name is What Should I Ask My Developers for My Portal? And the theme of today and tomorrow is really building an internal developer portal, taking up a portal's product approach, figuring out what use cases developers need to have. And it's not only that it's challenging sometimes for platform engineers to be product managers, it's even more challenging to really understand what should be measured and what people should be asked in order to do a good job for them. So we'll do this in a question and answer format. So I'd like to ask Abi some questions about what should we ask our developers. And let us begin. So I'm going to share my screen. So Abi, thank you for joining us. And again, what do I ask developers when planning the portal? I didn't even write survey because it's much more than that. But before we begin, I'd love to hear the story behind establishing DX and your background, because I think that will probably inform us better when asking you questions later on, and will probably help the audience ask questions as well.
Sure. Yeah. Ronnie, thanks for having me here. Excited to have this discussion. So my name is Abi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of DX. We're a developer intelligence platform. So we provide data and insights to engineering leaders to help them take the right action to drive higher ROI per developer, increase productivity, optimize engineering. And I started DX after spending several years in the same space of measuring developer productivity, building two companies actually in the space previously. Started DX because it became clear that there was another side to the story in terms of the data that organizations needed to address these complex questions. And so whereas the traditional approach to understanding productivity has relied on metrics such as story points and cycle time and pull requests. With DX, we, in addition to those types of metrics, provide organizations with self-reported metrics and insights from developers. And this gives you such a fuller view of the system because you're able to get visibility into areas that you can't measure objectively. You're also able to understand the developer experience and the actual friction points that developers face day to day. So today we work with about 200 organizations across the world, both tech companies like Dropbox and Toast, as well as traditional enterprises like Fiserv and Tesco, P&G, Pfizer. So yeah, the market seems to be receiving us well, and excited to share more about any learnings that may be valuable to your audience today.
Can you tell us about the magic of self-reporting versus just plain measurement?
Yeah, so self-reported metrics, there's some cynicism towards them for good reason, that they can be subjective or error prone, or they require surveys which are burdensome to developers and expensive to run. But when you look at how leading organizations in the industry like Google or Microsoft, Spotify, and the 200 organizations that we work with are actually getting data and insights about developer productivity, the self-reported insights are a huge critical tool in getting the data we need. And one example of why self-reported data is so important is that a lot of larger organizations, to measure something, say for example, like MTTR, if you're a small startup, MTTR is really easy to measure. You can just look at your Jira board and count how long it takes for bugs and defects to be resolved. But if you work in an organization with thousands of developers, you're probably scattered across different ways of tracking defects and incidents, potentially different tools or setups within those tools. And so it can take months, even sometimes years, to be able to triangulate all that data with deployment data across different systems and really answer the questions you want to get insight into. And so, just going to developers and asking them how long something takes is an alternative to that. In addition to being able to ask developers how long something takes, you could ask them, whether they feel that the process is effective or what the roadblocks are in the way of them doing their best work or resolving problems with customers. And so, yeah, self-report is really just a data collection method, no different than how we more typically collect metrics from our systems. But it's really important because there's so much more to developer productivity than what the system-based metrics can tell us alone. And that's where self-reported data comes into play.
So kind of trying to repeat what you're saying, instead of getting into a religious discussion on how do you measure MDTR in a huge organization with many types of systems and developers, actually asking people what they feel about that, assuming they're honest, they want to do a good job, and of course they do, will provide a very valuable metric that the organization can then manage around.
Exactly.
Good. It makes us all feel better to ask all kinds of questions and not just measure stuff. Next question, developer productivity and developer experience. I know you guys touch on both. And of course, you can say that one would create the other. What are your views there?
I think there's different ways of looking at this. In my view, I mean, developer productivity and developer experience are not the same thing, because when we talk about developer experience, we're talking about the friction and processes and tools that developers encounter in their work. And that's different than developer productivity, which is more of an output of what developers do and how businesses think about the investment or return on investment they're getting out of their R&D organizations. And so, different ways to look at it include, developer productivity being a subset of developer experience, right? Productivity is one dimension in the being of developers. Another way to look at this is that developer productivity is the output or outcome of developer experience. We know from data that organizations and teams with better developer experience are more productive. And at the individual level, we also know from research and data that developers who have less friction points in their day-to-day work feel and are more productive. And so that shouldn't be surprising to anyone listening. But yeah, those are some ways to think about productivity and experience together.
And in a very kind of coarse way, would you say that developer experience is measured through the self-reported part of surveys, or through surveys really, while productivity can be both surveyed, as you just gave us an example before that with regards to the MTTR, and measured objectively, quote unquote, from various data within the engineering organization?
It's a good question. I would say both productivity and developer experience, in addition to a lot of other dimensions like software quality and engagement, all those things can be measured and should be measured with a combination of self-reported data as well as objective system data. I think the optimal form of measurement for a given metric ultimately depends on a number of factors. One being, can it be measured objectively? There are certain things like developer satisfaction that you really can't measure objectively just by their nature. And then there's also things like the MTTR example where you can measure something objectively, but it may not be the most practical way depending on your systems and your organization. And so I would decouple the method of measurement from the object of measurement, and you can think about the two independently.
Okay, I'm starting to think about a lot of questions around how do you survey developers about whether they're happy with tools, whether there are other ways they would like to use tooling, but we'll get into them in a minute. So I'm mentioning the thought. So before we go into portals, so portals are supposed to provide some sort of self-service experience, just like all of platform engineering. That should be important to both productivity and experience. Hopefully, if developers waste less time doing stuff they don't like or stuff that's very manual, they're happier. Same applies for productivity. The connectivity is actually fairly self-evident. But if we ignore portals for a minute, what is the process that happens post measurement or survey? So what do companies usually do? So they run periodical surveys, if you can talk about that a little, and then how do they identify